Hey guys, it's Penguin here, and welcome back to another gold making video. In today's video, this is episode 2 of our Midnight Preparation series, and our first deep dive into a specific profession, and today we're going to be talking about tailoring. Now, many of you are probably not shocked by this being the first profession, just because I personally love tailoring so much, so hopefully by the end of this video you feel more comfortable about tailoring going into Midnight, and hopefully I can even convince you to pick up tailoring yourself in Midnight if you aren't planning to already. Now, this video is going to be broken down into a few different parts, so please feel free to use the timestamps down below, as these videos do tend to be a little bit long. Up first, we're going to be talking about some general pros and cons of this profession in Midnight. Then I'm going to give a quick overview of the profession, talking about things that are changing versus staying the same, showing you the new recipes. Then we're quickly going to talk about leveling the profession, and lastly, I'm going to show you 3 to 4, depends on the profession. In this video, there will be 4 different paths of specializations, and showing you how to build those specializations out depending on your playstyle. So once again, feel free to use the timestamps down below, and let's get started. Up first, let's talk about some pros and cons of tailoring. And the most important pro that I see for tailoring is that it is very, very cheap compared to other crafting professions. Tailoring is based on cloth, and cloth just happens to generally be very, very cheap compared to ores and herbs, which causes items to also be cheaper, which just makes it a lot more accessible to beginners. Of course, if you have millions of gold in your pocket, this doesn't really matter per se, but if you're somebody starting out and you're worried about dumping all of your gold into a single profession and something not working out, you really don't have to worry about that too much with this profession, just because of how cheap it is. Secondly, another huge pro, especially in the War Within as well as Midnight, is that there are a ton of options. What I mean by this is whatever sort of playstyle you like to do, whether that's, mass crafting, sitting AFK, playing on the region-wide auction house, maybe it's doing work orders and crafting orders for your guild or for your community, or even if you don't want to craft at all and you just like to farm and you like to gather things, tailoring is still great in this expansion, but because of that, there's just so many options, and that kind of falls into pro number 3, which is there is an alt army specific recipe for you in this profession. Now, with concentration in the game, technically anything can be an alt army friendly recipe, just because using concentration is a limited per day thing, and when you use concentration, it's generally profitable because you get to use less expensive materials. So generally, you can turn a random potion craft into an alt army recipe, you can turn a random reagent from leatherworking, things like that. So of course, this isn't super special, but cooldown bolts are back in Midnight, which means that's a specific recipe that has a daily amount that you can craft every single day, meaning alt armies are very good. Then lastly, the final pro is that there are a lot of shuffles, especially at the start of the expansion, that you can do with tailoring. Now, there are not as many per se as in the War Within, just due to recipe changes, but a lot of people are familiar with disenchant shuffling, and the 2 professions that kind of led disenchant shuffling in the War Within was tailoring and enchanting. Sometimes leatherworking, works in there too, but generally tailoring and enchanting work very, very well together to do some really cool shuffles at the start of an expansion. Now, with that being said, there are a few cons to this profession, and one of them is the biggest pro of it being super cheap. Because it is super cheap, even if it has high profit margins, generally you're making less gold per item because of it. What I mean by this is if something costs, 200 gold to craft and you make a 50% margin, that is still good gold, but it's very different if you were to craft something that's 2,000 gold and you make 50% margin on that. So it's just, the amount of gold that you're making per item sold is generally going to be cheaper just because you have a cheaper crafting cost, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It really only becomes a bad thing if you're worried about how much time you're spending crafting versus selling, and really at that point that's the people that have millions of gold, right? So if you're a beginner, I would not necessarily call this a con, it's just something to keep in mind. And then another con that I do want to bring up, and we'll talk about this more when I go over a specific spec tree, but if you guys do have the War Within experience, you know that the cooldown bolts did pretty well at the start of the expansion, and they were very good for alt armies. Those cooldown bolts are used to make some pretty good armor, as well as high-end bags. And as the expansion went on, just because more and more people got access, those bolt prices quickly fell and their margins became slimmer and slimmer. And then when you had that competing against concentration crafting with enchants, the bolts themselves were just not that appealing. So something to keep in mind is that those specific alt army things might degrade faster than other things, but at the start you should be okay. It's just something to keep in mind. But with those pros and cons out of the way, let's talk about tailoring as a profession in Midnight. Up first, what we always do is I quickly want to highlight profession tools. As you guys know, every single crafting profession has the ability to use a profession tool, as well as 2 profession accessories. And on screen right now, you will see a diagram of what the best in slot items are for those slots. And if you're currently familiar with the War Within, the good news is that everything stays the same, basically. Meaning that your tool is going to come from engineering, one of your accessories will come from blacksmithing, and your other accessory will come from tailoring. So that's the exact same profession setup as the previous expansion. But with that out of the way, let's talk about what's new in Midnight. Up first, the biggest thing you're probably going to see is that there is no more thread unraveling. You're simply just dealing with bolts, which is crafted by linen, and then you do see thread here, but this is simply just a vendor item, so this is not something you're going to craft. In terms of the recipes that you see right here, these are all recipes that just came from the trainer. So you have your basic bolt right here, which requires some vendor items as well as bright linen. Then you have your simple bandage for the expansion, and then you have your slightly better bolt, which requires just yet again more bolts and more vendor items. Then this is your basic BOE leveling gear, something that we have seen before. Once again, this right here is sold by tailoring vendors, so these are 2 vendor items, so this is a lot more simple than before. Then you have your basic green BOE profession gear, so you'll see the same sort of professions as before. You'll be making items for alchemists, enchanters, fishers, herbalists, other tailors, as well as chefs. And you'll see a little bit of hint right here. This is some of those new enchanting materials. And then this is your basic spell thread. Of course, in the new expansion, we have better bags. So right here, this is your basic better reagent bag, which is going to be 38 slots. Then you have the more expensive one, which is 40 slots. Then your normal bag is 36 slots, with the better bag being 38. And this right here is the first look at those bolt cooldowns, which we'll talk about in a second. But you'll see that we have the Arcana Weave, as well as the Sunfire Silk. Another thing that you're going to see is these emotes, and this is kind of that essence of Midnight. There's quite a few different versions, but right here we have the Mote of Primal Energy. This one uses the Mote of Pure Void. There's 2 other ones. This is just going to come from, things in the world. People are going to get it when gathering, people are going to get it when killing things, that sort of thing. This is just your generic essence of the expansion that you'll buy off the auction house. Then an exciting new thing to Midnight is tailors are actually going to have some cosmetic wear. So right here, these are 6 different new capes. These are cosmetic only, and they're also bind on warband, so you can learn these yourself. But right here, they are quite expensive. They're using that special bolt as well as the just special silk, and then some of that primal energy as well. But these are just some new cosmetic items, which, hey, it's pretty cool to have some new cosmetics. Nothing crazy per se, but just some things you can do to fill out your cosmetics if you are a transmog collector. But that's it in terms of vendor recipes. So once again, this all comes from Trainer, and everything else from here down is going to come either from specializations or a variety of sources. Up first, the biggest thing is these bolt cooldowns. So the first one we have here is the Arcana Weave. This will come from specializations, which I'll highlight in a second, but the actual Arcana Weave itself will once again come from humanoids. So you will find these as you go about and kill humanoids and stuff, you'll get this basic cloth, and then you'll use that as well as the better bolts as well as some motes to craft this into that actually better cooldown bolt, which is used for some embellished gear you saw with some of those cosmetics and also those bags. Then we have the same one, but this is the Sunfire Silk. It works the exact same. You have the basic Sunfire Silk, which is a world drop, then you have the better crafted bolts, and then also the Mote of Lights. Moving on, we have two embellishments, so you can pause this if you want, but you have the Arcano Weave lining, which you can see what that does, and then you also have the Sunfire Silk lining. These are embellishments, meaning you can apply them to a piece of gear, and those people wearing it will get that specific buff. And then something we have seen before, this is your basic unembellished items. This comes all from specializations, so you have one for every slot, and then of course this is just your cloak. It's renamed, or it kind of has a special name per se, but yet again it just comes from specializations. You'll see yet again that it requires sparks, then it requires just a vendor item, it requires both of those cooldown bolts, and then also some enchanting materials as well. Moving on, we have the embellished gear. So this is the Arcano Weave version of the embellished. Pretty much the same. You're dealing with some pretty high-end materials and of course sparks. This is a set piece, so you need multiple, at least two in a set in order to get the buff. So there you go. Feel free to pause if you want to read more about them. Then we have the exact same thing, but this is for Sunfire. In terms of if these are worth unlocking or crafting, that's going to be kind of a best in slot list question. So whether you use Icy Veins or Wowhead, wherever you get your knowledge, you can look to see if any of those sources are recommending this gear for people. Then lastly, you have your profession accessories. So in Midnight, there are 3 tiers of every single profession equipment. You have the green BOE gear, which you saw earlier that you get from the trainer. Then you have the slightly better version, which is your blue version, which is BOP, meaning you have to order it through the crafting order system. And this comes from a vendor inside of your main city, which you spend your Artisan Moxie on. If you guys don't know what Artisan Moxie is, I highly recommend watching the first video of this series. But you'll get Artisan Moxie as you complete first-time crafts, as you do quests, things like that. And so you can spend this on unlocking these recipes. And then lastly, you have the better version of the blue version, which is the epic version. And at the current moment, neither of these use Moxie to craft. We'll have to see if that actually happens, but the main difference between these two is that they both give the same amount of skill. However, the epic quality just gives you more stat bonuses. So this one right here is giving plus 51 and plus 51 at a quality 3. That overall is going to be a lot higher once you have a rank 5 epic compared to a rank 5 rare. And then we have our upgraded versions of the spell thread. This vendor right here is tied to renown, so yet again this will require Artisan Moxie as well as that specific currency for the renown. So this will be something that you have to kind of grind for a little bit. Same with this one. This is actually a drop from a boss, so yes, there we go. And then yet again, this is just the upgraded version of the spell thread. You can take a look at those recipes right there. And then we really don't have anything else left. We have the PvP equipment, which is something we saw in the War Within. You buy this all for honor. It's 7,500 each, and you just buy this at the PvP vendor. And then of course in Midnight, every single crafting profession is getting a handful more decor. So Tailoring is getting 6 different items, and these all have a variety of sources. So right here, you'll see this actually once again just comes from the vendor instead of the main city. So this is simply just an Artisan Moxie cost. This right here is also Artisan Moxie. This right here requires a specific renown with a specific faction. This one drops from Eversong Treasures. This one comes from a specific quest. And then this one also drops from Victorious Caches. So these all have a variety of sources, and that's kind of the trend with housing decor. I'm pretty sure off the top of my head, only 2 or 3 decor recipes actually come from the profession trainer. Everything else comes from some sort of unique source. So these decor recipes is a lot more of a grind compared to the old world decor. Now, I'm not going to give you a step-by-step leveling guide in this video because let's be honest, beta builds are still happening and things are going to change. I will have a spreadsheet linked in the description, and that spreadsheet will be updated before the actual expansion comes out, and you can go there whenever the expansion is out to get those leveling guides. But let's just give you a quick overview to get you kind of in the mindset and start preparing with what you can do. In Midnight, for tailoring, you are going to be able to hit about skill 60 relatively easy, and that's simply just going to come from your trainer learned recipes. So you'll start by just crafting some basic bolts, then to slightly better bolts, then you'll slowly unlock these pieces of gear that you can craft, and then you'll have to move on into some more expensive, but in terms of ease and cheapness, you should be able to hit 60 relatively fine. Once you hit 60, you are going to kind of be stuck with only the expensive options. What I mean by that is you're really only going to be able to either craft these cosmetic items, which are pretty expensive, especially at the start of an expansion, as well as high-end bags. And as you can see right now in my inventory, I did this just for the sake of this video, and I was able to get to 80 out of 100, but it cost me this many bags. You'll see that I made some pants, I made some robes, right here I made 15 spell threads. All of this is relatively cheap, but then I decided to spam bags all the way from about 60, 65, all the way to 80, but it quickly turns yellow and then green, and that is how many bags I had to do. Of course, when it's green, it comes down to RNG. But even so, if we take a look at, one of these recipes, this is not going to be a cheap craft at the start of the expansion. So that is something to be mindful of. Once you hit 80, and I'm not saying you necessarily have to hit 80 first, but if you do kind of grind it, you just throw a bunch of gold at it and you hit 80, there is nothing else you can do besides relying on the non-trainer recipes. Meaning, if you're somebody who's going into crafting orders, you can simply just unlock one of these recipes. You'll have to either use your alt sparks to level you up, or you can use somebody else's who's ordering from you, but you can level your way all the way up to 100 using any of these armor recipes. Of course, your limitation will be those sparks. Another option is that you can buy one of these profession accessories, and at the moment, because Moxie is not required, you technically can grind this all the way up to 100, and it's not going to be the cheapest thing in the world, but if you have a lot of gold, you technically could unlock one of these recipes and just mass craft it. Of course, if Moxie is added to this recipe, that's not going to be something you can do, that will be a limitation, but at the moment, because there's no Moxie, you could grind this all the way to 100. The decor pieces are likely not going to get you all the way to 100, maybe this plush bed, but yet again, that requires you to buy it. The spell threads will probably take you to about 95 or so. I haven't tested that, but yet again, this is a boss drop, and this comes from Renown, so probably not a super fast option. And then you can, of course, unlock the cooldowns, but then you can only craft so many per day, and things like that. So in terms of getting from 80 to 100, it will be a little bit of a grind. You'll be able to hit about 65 relatively easy, but then 60 to 80 is going to be very, very pricey. And then of course 80 to 100, you'll have to decide what sort of method you want to take to get it all the way up to 100. And alright, now let's talk about specializations, right? And I know a lot of people are skipping to this part of the video because they really want to know about builds, and I'm going to try to be as quick as possible, but there's a few tricky things here I really also want to make sure that I cover. We are going to be covering 3 different distinct builds. That's going to be one for farming, so if you don't want to do any sort of crafting whatsoever, we'll be covering that. Then we'll be talking about speccing out for specific armor pieces, and then lastly, we'll be talking about those cooldown bolts. And before we get to those crafting ones, I want to talk about kind of the fundamentals of tailoring and how that works out this time around. But up first, let's talk about gathering. Tailoring is yet again going to technically be a gathering profession in Midnight, and that is because they are going to be responsible for looting all of the raw cloth from humanoids throughout the world, and they have dedicated specializations that they can use to actually up their quality and the amount that they get for humanoids. This specialization is perfect if you are a farmer, so if you do do active gold making and you like to just farm, you strictly want to farm and not craft, you like to do group farms, things like that, this is a perfect specialization for you. Or even somebody who doesn't really do professions but you just want some side income, there's no harm in picking up tailoring because that's just passive gold. As you do quest and all of that, you'll gain some cloth which you can either turn into something that you want yourself or you can sell it on the auction house for some quick cash. But thankfully, this will be the simplest specialization that we have today, and it will cost you 100 knowledge points. Up first, we have the Fabric Specialist tree, which is really going to be the main gathering tree. This first one right here, as you can see, every point you put in, you're going to gain 1% of a drop chance to get cloth in all of the midnight zones. So just putting points into this main node is going to give you one more percentage. As well as some extra bonuses, you'll see that, of course, you'll gain some crafting things, but we'll ignore that for the sake of the specialization. But once you are 10 points in, you'll now be able to get higher quality cloth from drops, which is just more gold in your pocket. And then once you max it out 30 out of 30, you'll get even more high quality cloth. So this is really great and something you definitely want if you're going to be doing any of those big group farms. Then the rest of this tree is exactly the same, but it's split up by zones. So to the right, we have the otherworldly cloth, and you'll see that immediately upon unlocking this, you will get more cloth drops in the rootlands as well as the voidlands, which are just 2 zones in Midnight. And yet again, when you max it out, so once you put in 25 points, you'll get even more high quality cloth when you are looting in those 2 zones. And the ones over here, the Eastern Kingdoms, is the exact same, but it's for the other 2 zones. So you'll see you'll get more cloth drops from Eversong Woods as well as Zulaman, and then once you have that maxed out, you'll get even more of that high quality cloth. So right here, this is going to be an 80 knowledge point dump, and you're definitely going to want to max this out. Now in terms of what sort of order you want to go, it depends on you. Technically, if you find a group farm that's only in Eversong Woods and you really want to do that one the best you can technically go for Eastern Kingdom cloth first, then fill out the other side or vice versa. You'll have to see where the popular farms are, but this overall spec tree will be very important. Now you're probably thinking, Penguin, you said 100 points, but there's only 80 here, and that is where Nimble Needlework comes into play. This one, at first glance, doesn't look very good for gatherers, but there's some hidden points here that you definitely want to make sure you unlock. What you'll need to do is the main goal is to unlock these main, or I guess the main sub-nodes, however you want to call it, or the middle nodes, and to do that, you need to put 20 points into the main needlework tree. Now, these 20 points aren't technically going to do anything for you. You'll see you gain skill and some other crafting bonuses, but that necessarily isn't effective for gathering. But the reason why you do this is as soon as you unlock one of these sub-nodes, you'll be able to actually loot the raw cloth for the bolt cooldowns. So in order to make Arcano Weave bolts, you need the raw Arcano Weave. Vice versa, in order to make the Sunfire bolts, you need the raw Sunfire Silk. And to get both of those, you have to have these nodes unlocked, and then you'll start getting those from drops. So these are going to be your high quality cloth, meaning they're going to be a lot more expensive than just the default linen. So this is definitely something you want to make sure you unlock. The rest of these trees do not apply to gathering, it's all crafting related, so you don't really have to put any more points in, but it is important to at least get 20 points in here. When you put 5 points in, you'll be able to get one specialization, and once you have 20, you'll be able to get both. But right there, this is going to be your gathering setup for all the people who are going to be doing some human-aid cloth farming. Now, moving on, this is where we're going to start talking about crafting. And before we go into the 2 crafting specializations, I want to talk about the fundamentals, and this is where it's going to get a little bit tricky in Midnight. You guys have probably noticed by now, I've even said it myself, that specializations look almost identical than they did in the War Within, but there's a few sneaky changes that aren't very obvious unless you go digging for it. And the first one is this Fabric Specialist tree. If we flip over to the Fiber Arts right here, I would like to call this the Fundamentals of Tailoring Specialization. What I mean by this is that this is going to give you your big multi-craft bonuses, your big specialization bonuses for all of the ingenuity, for resourcefulness, etc. And it's also going to give you a lot of skill. If we take a look, you'll see right here, this first node is going to give you a bunch of skill for every single tailoring recipe. So regardless of what you're trying to craft, this is beneficial. As you put more points into it, you'll get some other bonuses like ingenuity, you'll get even more skill, resourcefulness, and even a crafting speed upgrade, but this applies to every single recipe, so regardless of if you're crafting bolts or armor, this applies to you. Then breaking off to each of one of these nodes, you have the resourcefulness node. So once again, this applies resourcefulness to every single tailoring craft, as well as a bunch of different bonuses regarding, there's some skill in here, but this is like the amount of materials you save. This also is just more percentage, etc. We have seen this sort of thing before. Over here, we have the same exact thing for ingenuity. Yet again, this is going to spend less concentration every time you use it, but also you'll gain more ingenuity, which is the chance to proc some refunded concentration. But yet again, this is pretty normal. Over here, exact same thing for multi-craft. This is going to give you multi-craft bonuses, but you'll see that some skill is also sticking in these trees as well. Lastly, we have this item enhancements one, and this is kind of the odd one out. This doesn't apply to all recipes. This just applies to item enhancements. So this would be a specific specialization if you're doing like embellishment crafting, things like that. But in general, this would be considered your generic tree. However, if we switch back over to Fabric Specialist, you will see that there is quite a lot of skill baked into this tree as well. This right here, just upon unlocking this tree, you're going to gain 5 skill, and that applies to every single tailoring recipe. You're also going to gain some resourcefulness, you're going to gain even more skill, and then of course if you dive into this, you'll see that every single point that you put into this otherworldly spec, you're going to gain +1 multicraft for any tailoring recipe. So this is technically kind of like a second multicraft node. Of course, the bonuses aren't as good because they're not directly multicraft related, but there you go, you'll gain some more multicraft, you'll gain resourcefulness, ingenuity, and even skill for every single tailoring recipe, and it's just baked into this kind of weird tree. Same thing over here, this is technically another ingenuity bonus. It applies to every single recipe, and you'll get, yet again, more multicraft, resourcefulness, ingenuity, and skill. And what I'm trying to say by this is that skill is scattered this time around. It's not just baked into one specialization tree. Technically, while there is a main skill node, which I would still consider fiber arts, there are other skill places somewhere, and if you're trying to max things out, you need all of these unlocked. But with that being said, do remember that fact, and let's switch over to your armor crafting. And alright, talking about armor crafting, there's 2 main things to think about. First of all, we have unembellished gear, so this is just your basic gear where you can apply your own embellishment, your own secondary stats, all of that. And then also there's the special embellished gear, which is either the Arcana Weave or the Sunfire. First things first, let's just talk about your basic garments. And in this example, let's say you want to go full in on cloaks. To do so, you want to head over to this first node right here, the Sindori Finery, and this is going to be your big armor crafting tree. If you're not going to craft armor, you basically want nothing to do with this tree. Just like the War Within, it is separated by gear slot, so you simply just have to follow the path down to whatever slot you want. In this case, we were going for cloaks, and once you unlock this sub-node, you will get the actual recipe, so the minimum amount of points you need to do that is you will gain your first sub-spec at 5 points in, so you'll have to put 5 points into the main node. Then if you put 10 points, you will gain the ability to choose one of these 3 sub-trees, and then finally you will unlock cloaks, and then you'll gain the recipe. Of course, at the end of the day, you want to have as much skill as possible because you want to produce quality 5 items, meaning in order to get as much skill as possible for cloaks, you want to max out these 3 nodes. Putting more points in here are not only going to just give you 1 skill for every point, but you'll get +5, +5, +5, and another +5, and you'll also be able to use less concentration per craft once this is all maxed out. These other two nodes are also going to give you 1 skill every single point allocated, and you'll also get some other bonuses, resourcefulness, ingenuity, some more skill. You know the basic information here. Now, something you'll notice is if I go over to this and I'm using the best quality reagents, I have max skill. As you can see, I am missing 90 skill points in order to max out quality 5. Now, if I had all blue tools or epic tools, it doesn't matter as long as I had blue or epic because they give the same amount of skill. If I had the best gear and slot, that would give me 40 points. So that would put me at 450, meaning I'm still missing 50 points of skill in order to guarantee a quality 5. If we go back to specializations and we go back to fiber arts, if we put 30 points into here, that will give us 30 skill because it's 30, every single point gives us 1 skill, so 30 knowledge points gives us 30 skill, meaning we are still missing 20. If we take a look, we will get another bonus 5 right here, and that's it. So now we are still missing 15 skill. So now we gotta think, okay, how do we get that 15 skill? Technically, what we could do is then spec into resourcefulness. Resourcefulness, of course, is beneficial. It's not the best stat to level up first, but you'll see that there is some hidden skill baked into this tree. So if I were to put 10 points into here, I will gain 5 skill. And then if I max this out, so another 30, or a total of 30 points, so another 20 points, I'll get another 5 skill. Meaning I will be at 10 skill right here, plus the 5 skill that I get right there. So that's 15, plus the 30 on that, I'm at 45 skill, meaning I'm still missing the 5 that I need in order to guarantee a quality 5. And that leaves my other option being I technically can go into multicraft and put 10 points into here. I'll gain another 5 skill, but of course multicraft isn't beneficial for armor, it doesn't proc. Instead, what you can do is just unlock the fabric specialist tree. Immediately upon unlocking, you'll gain 5 skill, and boom, there you go, you'll have the 50 that you need in order to max out this cloak. Now, the thing is that is a lot of knowledge points dedicated just for kind of that last 10 to 15 skill that you need. Technically, you have a few different options. Instead of putting points into resourcefulness, you could go over here, because once you put 20 points in, you'll gain more skill. And if you go into like Eastern Kingdoms cloth, for example, you'll gain 5 skill over here. So you do have some options, but really to gain the max amount of skill needed for a craft, that is going to be a very, very big knowledge point investment. That's where it might be very, very wise to go into concentration early. While concentration isn't going to necessarily get you anywhere closer into being able to guarantee a craft, that is going to lower the amount of concentration used per craft. So as you are grinding out those knowledge points, you'll be able to do more daily crafts, which just means more gold in the meantime before you get that max skill requirement. Now, moving on, you're probably thinking, all right, Penguin, what about these other embellished gear? And thankfully, the route is really not that much different. One of the tiny changes that you'll notice, or might not notice, in Midnight is that this needlework tree, all of these skill bonuses you see here is for specifically bolt crafting and crafting with the actual raw materials and not the cooked materials. What this means is that all of these skill bonuses you see in this tree doesn't actually affect the armor crafting itself. For example, let's say you don't necessarily want the basic cloak, but you want to do the Arcana Weave cloak. All you need to do is put in about 10 or 5 points here to unlock a subnode, then 10 points here to get you that cloak recipe. You'll see from here, using max quality reagents, we are yet again about 100 points off. We'll get 40 from the tools if we had them, so you would need 60 points of skill, which you would have to get yet again from these 2 other trees. Just to show you, if you hover over this, it says gain 1 skill when crafting bolts and reagents with Arcana Weave, and that is talking about the raw Arcana Weave, not the bolts. So if you look over here, we currently have 416 skill. If we apply a point into here, we still have 416. This does not affect the armor craft, that is strictly affecting the actual bolt crafts right here, and that is a little bit of a slight different from previous expansions. So yes, your main goal right here, if you wanted to max everything out, regardless of embellished or unembellished, you're going to want to make sure you go for your dedicated slot. Then if you do need to unlock a recipe, you'll do it through here. You'll see that you get the cloak recipe 10 points in. Over here, you'll get the boots recipe for 30 points. And then lastly, this bottom node will give you the bracer recipe as well. So you'll have to go a little bit further depending on what recipes you need. And it's the same thing over here, but for these Sunfire items. And then of course, in order to get the actual min-maxed, in order to guarantee a quality 5, that's where you're gonna have to rely on the skill bonuses through Fabrics Specialist as well as Fiber Arts, aka a lot of knowledge points in order to max it out. Meaning, if you are somebody who's trying to go for the most gold possible, it's probably worth taking a little bit of a detour to get as much concentration, as much ingenuity as possible, so you can get more crafts per day in the meantime. Now, with that being said, let's move on to the final spec I want to highlight, and that is for your bolt cooldown crafts. Specifically, I'm talking about the Sunfire Silk as well as the Arcana Weave. I'm just using Arcana Weave as the example, but of course it's the exact same thing, just the other side of the tree. The first thing that you're going to want to do is decide which bolt you want to go for first, and then you need to just start putting points into that tree. When you unlock the middle node, that is where you're going to learn the recipe to actually craft the bolt, and to do so, that's a 5 knowledge point investment, so immediately you'll be able to unlock that recipe. When you first unlock it, you will be able to do up to 10 crafts, and if we craft one of these, you'll see that the cooldown time between crafts is about 17 hours. So you'll have the max amount of crafts you can do is 10 at a time, and to get one back, it would be 17 hours. To reduce that, what you're going to want to do is unlock and max out this bottom node as fast as possible. To do so, you need to put 15 points in, and that will unlock the final sub-spec, and immediately upon unlocking, you'll be able to do 20 crafts per day, and your cooldown timer will go down even more, and once you max this out, you will shorten it to the maximum. And if you take a look, I can now craft up to 30, and my cooldown per craft is about 8 to 9 hours or so. And that means I can stack up to 30, and I will gain a new craft every about, let's just say, 9-ish hours. And then from here, yet again, you have a decision to make. Assuming you're kind of going the alt army route, I would highly recommend focusing on one bolt on one character, getting that all worked out, and then moving on to the second bolt. If you're doing this on one character, then it'll be up to you if you want to focus on one first and then get the other, but that comes down to personal preference. And this is where the talk of ingenuity versus maximum skill comes to play again. Personally, especially since these bolts themselves are already on a daily cooldown, you're not going to be able to mass craft them forever, just strictly because you can only do up to 30 crafts at a time, meaning I think ingenuity would be very, very important and beneficial. That will allow you to use cheaper quality reagents, use your concentration to craft the max quality, which not only gives you a higher profit margin, but that'll give you some more gold in your pocket. To do so, you would want to max out this ingenuity spec over here. That's kind of the main one, which is going to give you a ton of concentration bonuses and all of that. But let's talk about skill, because yet again, this is the big difference from the War Within. You'll see that I have already allocated a lot of points on this character, and now I am at skill 492 out of 530, meaning, let's just say I'm about 40 points away from being able to maximize this craft. And those 40 points that I'm missing would come from profession accessories. So currently, my current specialization has enough skill where if I had those profession accessories to give me the plus 40, I would be able to guarantee a quality 2. That's a bad habit I'm gonna have to break, and that's using max quality reagents. Now, to do this was a lot of knowledge points. The most obvious one is that I needed to max out the nimble needlework tree to get as much skill as possible. Every single point dedicated inside of this tree is going to give me 1 skill. As you can see, this is when crafting bolts, this is when crafting bolts or using Arcana Weave as a reagent, etc. And throughout this, I'm getting extra bonuses like +5, I'm getting some multicraft, etc, etc. But this right here is giving me a pretty big chunk of my skill. And then I had to move over to fiber arts, and of course, maxing this one out right here gives me that 30 skill, plus a bonus 5 right here, meaning I got 35 skill from these 30 points. But that means I am still missing some. So what I had to do was spec out 30 out of 30 in resourcefulness in order to get the +5 skill here, as well as the +5 skill here. Of course, I'm gaining other things as well. And same thing goes over here with the multicraft. I had to spec another 30 points just to get another 10 skill right here. But we're not done yet. Over at the fabric specialist, yet again, I needed 20 points into each of these branches, because 20 points in, I get another +5 skill. Over here, 20 points in, I get another +5. This doesn't give me anything. And then I got another 5 from just unlocking the tree, and I also got another 5 from putting 20 points in. The reason why I needed to put 25 was to unlock both subspecs. So literally right here, just for this gives me 10 skill right here. This gives me 5 skill, this gives me 5 skill. So for 20 skill points, I had to dedicate 65 knowledge points just for 20 skill. Now, of course, this gave me some other bonuses as well, but that is just a lot of knowledge points to spend. Meaning, in order to max out this craft, I had to spend a total of 30 plus 30, so that's 60, plus another 20, so that is 80 knowledge points, plus another 20, so that's 100, 120, then we have 145. And then over here, we have another 90 knowledge points right here. So we're at a 235 knowledge point requirement in order to maximize this craft. Now, of course, this helps you with other things. You know, you're not super far off with the other bolt, meaning all you have to do is just spec into these two right here, so that's just another 50 knowledge points, and then you'll have both of these maxed out. Because of this skill gives you skill for everything, as well as just crafting generic bolts, you'll be able to see that I can guarantee the basic bolts right here, I can guarantee bandages by quite a lot, and also I would be able to guarantee the quality 4 one right here. Once again, if I had those 40 skill from the tools, I would easily be able to guarantee this as well. So not all of these knowledge points are technically feeding into one item, you're getting the other requirements too, but that is just a very large requirement to max out a single item. So yeah, that's really what I wanted to highlight in today's video. This would be the generic kind of specialization path you want to go for, and of course, what I kind of recommend, especially for these alt army crafts, is that it is probably worth going into the ingenuity tree first, because yes, this is going to be a 30-point detour, but this is going to give you some big bonuses, not only with just plus ingenuity, but you're going to spend a lot more a lot less concentration per craft, meaning you can craft a lot more, and that's just going to make you more gold in the meantime. At the end of the day, it's going to come down to personal preference. We're going to have to see how many knowledge points we can comfortably get every single week, but right now it is a pretty big investment with how they have this tree laid out, and that is just something I really wanted to make sure was prevalent in this video. But yeah, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope this was not too confusing. These are long videos, so I apologize. Hopefully you had some yummy popcorn or some coffee, and if you have any more questions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. Let me know which profession you want to see next, and as always, everybody, have a good day.